with us today is Ken Preaus of Preaus Landscape of Tulsa, and he's got a really interesting machine to show us. Ken, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Brenda. How are you?
Doing very well.
Good.
Now, this is kind of looks like a big thing, but actually this is a very useful machine in a landscape situation, isn't it?
It is. It's a relatively new machine for our company. We've owned and used it for the last 2 years. It's referred to as a Dosco root cutting machine, and or could be referred to as a disc trencher. But we have found many useful purposes in the landscape, in particular regarding tree care with this machine that we're pretty excited about.
Okay. Now, what would separate this from, say, using a larger trencher? Why would this be a good thing?
Well, the advantage here, Brenda, is that it's simply more beneficial as far as tree roots go. Normal chain-type trenchers are pretty destructive to tree root systems, and the fortunate thing about this, it's actually equipped with stump cutting teeth, and it makes a very smooth, even cut that the trees tend to wall off easier.
Okay. Now, you've got several demonstrations here set up for uses for this, and this first one right here, what is this purpose here?
Brenda, we use silt fencing, usually in a construction setting, to prevent excess fill from running onto the root zones of our tree protection areas.
Right.
We've found that this machine is pretty beneficial for the installation of this silt fencing fabric, because we're able to get the lip of the fabric down into the soil. Normally we'll backfill this soil, and it makes a pretty tight barrier against any soil that would infiltrate into this zone. This soil is so hard today. We picked a great day to do this, but we actually got a fairly good trench, but I'm not going to attempt to backfill it because most of the soil just blew away today. It's so dry.
So, okay, now this would be more in a construction type of a situation, but you've got some good homeowner uses for this as well. True.
One of the reasons that we bought the machine and researched it out, we had a great need to find a way to install the new geotextile fabrics that are impregnated with herbicide. This fabric is referred to by as Typar biobarrier, and I've got to thank my friends at Estes Chemical for allowing me to use some of this today. They're very helpful with these demonstrations. The fabric is about 12 inches in depth, and on the back side of the fabric it's impregnated with a little button, a herbicide button. In this case, it's Treflan, and the fabric is guaranteed for 15 years from the manufacturer. Basically, how it works, we'll cut the slot into the soil using the root cutting machine. Get a very even, nice cut. Normally, it will be parallel to hard scaping or hard surfaces in the landscape. Even footings and foundations of homes, things of that nature. We'll make this cut. We'll try to regenerate the tree's root system back in this area after we soil test and use certain fertilizer mixes and biostimulant mixes. When the new adventitious roots form from back behind the cut, when they come into contact with the Treflan will actually kill the tip of that hair root.
Okay.
And the roots basically grow parallel to the fabric from that point on. It's a great use for sweet gums or silver maple or mulberry, any kind of an invasive tree that might be a problem as far as your hard paving and surfaces go.
So next to sidewalks, driveways, flower beds and stuff like that would be great.
Swimming pool decks, things of that nature.
Okay. Now right here you've got basically this looks like that kind of a barrier fencing that you put up in construction.
That's correct. Orange poly fencing, and that's exactly what it's for. We work with builders and architects occasionally to try to save trees on new construction sites, and even it could be commercial or residential.
Right.
But this machine has come in quite handy for usage here, because what we'll try to do is to separate our tree protection area, the root system, from the construction staging zone.
Okay.
We're better off just to make a nice clean cut, During the course of delineating that zone, we'll go ahead and use the orange poly fencing here, and we can go ahead and set the T-post down in the trench. Set it here as our barrier and backfill, and it makes a pretty good barrier for the average site. Now, in some cases, we might have to be a little more aggressive and use cyclone fencing or barbed wire or something of that nature, but for the average site, it works pretty well.
Okay. Now, and the reason that you would do that is you're wanting to make sure that you don't get compaction up close to the tree.
That's correct. Usually, we're in a situation where we have to negotiate or bargain with the designers and the construction people and the homeowners just simply for root space. We would never be this lucky to have this much area in our tree protection zone. Normally, this will encroach inside the drip zone of the tree, and so we're just better off to sever the roots and work within the boundaries of that zone.
Okay. Now, this is an application here that I'm not familiar with. What are we doing?
Brent, I'll tell you what, I don't know if you've ever seen a lightning system installation in a tree as a preservation technique, but we've also found that the root cutter serves us very well in this regard. Rather than having to hand dig or use a large chain type trencher inside this root zone, what we have done here is to cut in a radial sense, a radial direction out away from the trunk, much like this is the hub on a bicycle wheel and this is a spoke.
Right.
That way we'll do much less damage to the root system. I picked the flat side of this tree here. It's almost a concave area because I had a suspicion that we really didn't have a root flare here or a series of big roots. And as it turns out, I don't think that we disturbed any root of any consequence there. But this copper cable is normally used as our ground wire that runs over to a ground rod that we ground into the soil. So this is just another example as to how this machine can be used. Irrigation contractors probably could have a use for it in a tree zone. It has multiple uses, and I'm sure that I've only discussed a few.
Right, but basically the reason this works well is because it does as little damage to the root zone as possible.
That's true. That's exactly correct.
And that's kind of what we're going for here.
That's exactly correct.
Now, you had one final application with this, and that is in a case where soil has been compacted around the tree?
That's right. Impacted soil is very difficult to aerate. We have in the past tried several techniques, vertical mulching with augers, to try to open up a column between the atmosphere and the original grade in the soil. And unfortunately, that's usually when we're too late, when we got there after construction's already occurred. There's been a grade change, usually the addition of some fill or simply compacting the original grade. So this machine has come in pretty handy because the old system of augering individual holes into the soil on a grid pattern is very labor intensive, very difficult. And there has been some research done out of Bartlett Labs up in the Northeast by Dr. Tom Smiley that indicated that a radial mulching technique works just as well, and it's really a lot less labor.
Good. Well, we appreciate you explaining this and also explaining, how things can be remedied in homeowner situations.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.